saw it coming. On a night filled with Hollywood glitz, viral performances, and the usual carefully staged moments, it wasn't a chart-topping artist or scandalous award speech that set the internet on fire. It was Tyler Perry, the soft-spoken billionaire, usually known for staying far away from celebrity drama, who grabbed the mic at the 25th BET Awards and dropped what many are now calling the most quietly devastating speech of his career. Perry didn't mention any names. He didn't have to. His words, calm but razor-sharp, sliced through the carefully polished image Meghan Markle had spent years building. For millions watching, it wasn't just a speech. It was the first public crack in a story that had been tightly controlled for years. And as those words spread like wildfire, what followed would pull back the curtain on a friendship few truly understood, and expose the shocking downfall of Meghan Markle's Hollywood empire. In 2020, when Meghan Markle and Prince Harry made their dramatic exit from the British royal family, few understood the full weight of what they were walking into. They weren't just leaving behind royal titles and palaces, they were stepping into a world where alliances mean survival, and true friends are hard to find. That's when Tyler Perry stepped in. Without hesitation, Perry handed them the keys to his $18 million Beverly Hills mansion. He didn't just offer a place to stay. He covered their security, protected their privacy, and helped them quietly transition into their new life in America. At a time when headlines were ruthless and public opinion was unpredictable, Perry provided a safe haven. To the public, it looked like nothing more than an extraordinary act of kindness. A Hollywood mogul extending a hand to a young couple under siege. But behind closed doors, the relationship was far more complicated. What started as genuine generosity slowly twisted into something Perry hadn't anticipated. A one-sided relationship that drained not just his finances, but his emotional energy. In the beginning, Perry reportedly saw himself in Meghan and Harry, people who had faced public judgment and media scrutiny. But as months turned into years, and as lucrative deals with Netflix and Spotify piled up for the Sussexes, Perry began noticing something unsettling. The gratitude never came. The favors kept being requested, but the appreciation never seemed to follow. What was once a private friendship had begun to feel transactional. And Perry, known for his discretion and loyalty, kept his silence. Until that night at the BET Awards, when silence was no longer an option. When Tyler Perry stepped onto the stage at the BET Awards, nobody expected anything more than the usual, maybe a thoughtful speech, a few kind words, and a graceful exit. That's his style. But instead, Perry delivered something that instantly froze the room. He never said Meghan's name. He didn't have to. Standing under the bright lights, with millions watching, Perry began speaking about generosity and betrayal. He told the story of opening his home to someone in need, offering not just shelter, but protection, financial help, and emotional support. And then he paused. Some folks borrow blessings like they're owed, but never return the favor. He said, his voice calm but cutting. For those who knew the history, the message was crystal clear. This wasn't about some vague acquaintance. This was a direct reference to his once private relationship with Meghan Markle. What made the moment so devastating wasn't anger or bitterness. It was the calm, almost surgical way he delivered it. The words sliced deeper because they were controlled. Tyler Perry wasn't venting. He was exposing. In that instant, a quiet gasp swept across both the live audience and social media. The man known for protecting his inner circle had just broken ranks. And as the cameras kept rolling, millions of viewers realized they were witnessing the unraveling of one of Hollywood's most tightly managed stories. But what triggered Perry to finally speak out? The real story behind that moment was even messier. And it all started with one shocking request. The breaking point didn't come with loud arguments or public fights. It started with what Meghan described as a simple favor. Sometime after settling into their new life, Meghan reached out to Perry with a request. She wanted access to his private jet. No discussion about scheduling, costs, or logistics, just an expectation that it would be made available. After all, Perry had already opened his home, paid for security, and absorbed countless expenses on their behalf. What was one more favor? But for Perry, this wasn't about money. It was about something far more uncomfortable. A growing sense that the friendship was becoming one-sided. He wasn't being asked, he was being expected to comply. And when he politely declined, not because he couldn't afford it, but because the entire dynamic had started to feel transactional, Meghan reportedly didn't take it well. According to insiders, her reaction was swift and harsh. Behind the scenes, she lashed out, frustrated not at the denial itself, but at the idea that Perry was now setting boundaries. That moment, the private jet request, was the catalyst that made Perry step back and see the bigger picture. It wasn't just one request, it was a pattern. Over time, what was once framed as a friendship had quietly shifted into something else, an expectation of endless access, favors, and loyalty, without accountability. And as Perry would soon discover, he wasn't the only one noticing. At first, Perry tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding, a moment of frustration. But as months passed, a troubling pattern began to emerge. And it wasn't just Perry who saw it. People inside Perry's own circle, staffers, producers, longtime colleagues, started quietly pulling him aside, sharing what they'd observed. The whispers were all eerily similar. Meghan didn't just accept favors, she stockpiled them like currency. Every relationship seemed to follow the same trajectory: favors requested, support expected, and once the benefits dried up, distance followed. Some warned Perry outright, "She doesn't return favors, she collects them." At first, he resisted believing it. After all, he had offered his help out of genuine compassion. But the signs kept piling up. As the Netflix and Spotify deals came in, with millions flooding into Meghan and Harry's growing empire, Perry watched as gratitude remained noticeably absent. There were no offers to repay, no gestures of acknowledgement, not even the basic courtesy of staying connected. It was as if the friendship had served its purpose. And now Perry was being quietly shelved, but things didn't stop there. In early 2024, Perry learned that Meghan had allegedly leveraged his name behind closed doors. During a private pitch meeting for a new media venture, Meghan reportedly suggested that Perry was quietly backing her project, without his knowledge or permission. To investors, it was a subtle power play. Dropping Perry's name gave her credibility. But when word reached Perry, it was a line crossed too far. What Perry once saw as helping a friend now felt like being used as a pawn. The generosity he offered was being weaponized to open doors for her, doors she had no intention of walking through with him. And Perry wasn't the only one growing uncomfortable. Others who had worked closely with Meghan were starting to speak up, and their stories were shockingly consistent. When Tyler Perry broke his silence, the reaction inside Hollywood was immediate and brutal. This wasn't just anyone airing dirty laundry. Perry is one of the industry's most respected powerhouses, a billionaire studio owner with an untouchable reputation for loyalty, discretion, and class. If someone like him was willing to speak out, insiders took notice. And fast. Almost overnight, the phone calls started. A producer attached to Meghan and Harry's latest Netflix pitch reportedly pulled out within hours of Perry's BET Awards speech. Another investor who had already sat through multiple planning meetings for Meghan's new media project bluntly told associates, "I don't want to be involved in something that feels this toxic." And it wasn't just about the content, it was about the people behind it. Meghan, once seen as a symbol of empowerment, was now being viewed as a growing liability. Investors don't like risk. And drama, especially drama involving emotional manipulation, backroom power plays, and a billionaire mogul publicly distancing himself, was the kind of risk nobody wanted to touch. In an industry built on whispered deals and carefully managed relationships, Meghan's name was suddenly sending up red flags. Executives who once jockeyed for meetings were now quietly backing away. Collaborators who previously fought to attach their names to her projects were ghosting entirely. Even Oprah's camp, once tightly aligned with Meghan, offered nothing but silence as the backlash grew. No public defense, no quiet support, just distance. For Meghan, who had spent years meticulously curating her public image, this wasn't just professional damage, it was personal. Hollywood doesn't often pick sides publicly, but behind closed doors, people were already making up their minds. And the more her team tried to spin the narrative, the more obvious the desperation became. As the fallout spread, Meghan's PR machine kicked into overdrive. The team that once masterfully controlled every headline now found itself scrambling just to contain the damage. Their first move? Reframe the narrative. Media outlets were quietly offered exclusive interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and even hints at a potential podcast series to set the record straight. The goal was simple: paint Tyler Perry as bitter, misunderstood, and out of touch, a man whose generosity had been misinterpreted. But the media wasn't buying it. Reporters who once lined up for access now hesitated. Journalists whispered that the behind-the-scenes offers felt desperate, staged, like a sinking ship throwing out life rafts to anyone willing to grab one. The more Meghan's team pushed, the more skeptical the coverage became. And that desperation didn't go unnoticed inside Hollywood either. Insiders revealed that Meghan's team had even tried to blacklist certain journalists who dared to ask unscripted or uncomfortable questions during interviews. A respected publicist later confirmed that media outlets were being pressured to stick to pre-approved talking points or risk losing future access. But the harder they tried to spin it, the faster the narrative slipped out of their hands. The problem wasn't just the media. It was the growing chorus of voices, former staffers, consultants, producers, all telling eerily similar stories about control, manipulation, and loyalty treated like a transaction. What made it even more damaging was that these weren't anonymous. Tabloids or faceless sources close to the situation. These were people who had worked directly with Meghan, people who had once been part of her carefully built inner circle, and now they were all walking away. While the headlines focused on the drama behind closed doors, the financial damage was mounting, fast. Archewell, the foundation and business venture that once stood as Meghan and Harry's post-royal crown jewel, was suddenly facing an uncertain future. Deals that once seemed locked were now being quietly reconsidered. Potential investors who had been eager to align themselves with the Sussex brand were pulling back, spooked by the growing toxicity surrounding Meghan's name. According to insiders, multiple internal projects were abruptly paused. Scheduled hires were frozen. Budget meetings, once routine, were happening weekly, as executives scrambled to reassess what deals were still salvageable. Even Netflix, once their most stable partner, reportedly began reevaluating its long-term commitment, worried about growing public backlash and whether the Sussex brand still carried the same draw it once promised. The financial pipeline that had fueled Meghan and Harry's media empire was drying up, and the numbers weren't offering any comfort. In just 1 year, U.S. public support for the couple had reportedly dropped by over 30%. In the UK, where their reputation had long been battered, the collapse was even more severe. What once felt like a global movement now looked like a cautionary tale. Brand sponsors grew hesitant. Platforms that had once competed to feature Meghan's voice were now passing on offers. Collaborators who might have been eager to attach their names before were ghosting emails altogether. For a brand that thrived on public goodwill, celebrity buzz, and carefully controlled narratives, this wasn't just bad press, it was existential. And while Archewell's team quietly fought to stop the bleeding, an even more damaging question began circulating, one that Meghan had avoided for years. How much of her carefully constructed story had ever really been true? For years, Meghan Markle had carefully built her public identity, the misunderstood outsider, the modern feminist icon, the brave woman who stood up against an ancient institution. She was the victim who defied the crown, the underdog who inspired millions, the media mogul carving out her own empire. But now, all of it was under attack. Not from tabloids, but from the very people who once stood beside her. As more insiders came forward, a disturbing pattern emerged. Carefully. Controlled narratives, extreme loyalty demands, and ruthless control over anyone who questioned her authority. Former assistants described a workplace ruled by emotional exhaustion, where gratitude was rarely expressed and dissent was quietly punished. Even Harry, once her most vocal defender, seemed to fade into the background. Some insiders whispered that he was simply burnt out, exhausted from years of battles with family, the media, and now their collapsing empire. Others believed he was quietly trying to salvage what little remained of their public image behind the scenes. But either way, his silence only fueled speculation. And then came the final blow, silence from the very people who once elevated her. Oprah's camp, once one of Meghan's strongest allies, offered no public support. Hollywood studios, once eager for partnership, distanced themselves. Investors quietly withdrew. Journalists who once rushed to defend her now hesitated. The support system that had once made Meghan untouchable was now disintegrating, one powerful, silence at a time. Social media, once her strongest weapon, turned against her almost overnight. Hashtags that once praised her now mocked her. Memes painted her as entitled and manipulative. Longtime fans went quiet. Supporters grew scarce. The narrative had fully shifted. And for Meghan, it wasn't just a public relations crisis. It was an identity crisis. For a woman who had spent years carefully controlling every aspect of her story, this wasn't just bad press. It was personal collapse. The mask had slipped, and what was left behind wasn't the empowered symbol millions once rooted for, but a portrait of control, ambition, and burned bridges. And through it all, Tyler Perry never said another word. His silence after that award speech spoke louder than anything else. He had made his statement and walked away. In Hollywood, reputations aren't destroyed by screaming matches or public outbursts. They're dismantled quietly, one silence at a time. And that's exactly what made Tyler Perry's speech so lethal. He didn't attack, he didn't rant. He simply told his truth and walked away. For Meghan Markle, it wasn't just a moment of bad press. It was a mirror reflecting back years of carefully hidden behavior. Behavior that, once exposed, caused even her closest allies to pull back. The public watched as investors vanished, projects stalled, supporters grew silent, and headlines shifted from admiration to accusation. The woman who once walked away from royalty to control her own story now finds herself losing control all over again. First exiled from the crown, now exiled from the culture she tried to conquer. And perhaps the most devastating part of it all? It wasn't the tabloids, it wasn't the palace, it wasn't even the media. It was the people who once opened their doors, extended their hands, and stood beside her, who finally said, "Enough."